Make sure your Bibles are still open there to Genesis chapter 29. If you're not that familiar with the entire story, over this chapter and the next chapter too, it gets pretty convoluted a little bit. It gets kind of a little unusual as far as the family relationships go. But we're not going to go into all that today. If you've not studied that, I challenge you to do so. The next message will be all set and prepared to go. But trust you know a little bit about the story. As we just read it, it is an amazing love story that we have here with Jacob and Rachel. We find it was love at first sight. I don't know if you believe in love at first sight, but he was coming up. If you remember, he's on the run from his brother who was going to kill him. He just stopped by Bethel, got right with God, and God was putting him on the right path. And now he's headed to his father's family to find a bride. And so as he walks up, we just read it's the first time he's there, walks into town, goes to the well and finds the people. He said, I'm looking for my family. And he said, well, there they are. And in fact, here comes his daughter. And as you saw that, as he went and got the water for her, it bit him bad. It bit him hard. Oh, as he came to her, look if you would, please, in case you missed it. Verse number 10. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now, this is the first time he's met her. This is the first time he's seen her. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. I guarantee you, it was love at first sight. And it wasn't just a little pitter-patter. It wasn't just well, she's pretty cute. It wasn't just, I hope I get to know her a little bit. Man, he was weeping. He was crying. He was all over himself in love with Rachel. And that love, he had it bad. And that love lasted a lifetime. And it was a very unique and special love he had for Rachel. And in fact, that love for Rachel spilled over to her two children, which ended up causing trouble later on. The two children she was able to give him was Joseph and Benjamin. If you know the story, we'll see later on about Joseph, the favoritism, and how much that Jacob loved Joseph more than the others, and Benjamin he was so concerned about him as well. But he had this special love that went with her. Now, we like to say, oh, wasn't that a wonderful start? Isn't it an amazing story? And they lived happily ever after. But it's not a happily ever after story. It was a badly dysfunctional family. I mean, you say, oh, I thought I was the only one that had a dysfunctional family. No, you're not the only one that has a dysfunctional family. Everybody's family is somewhat dysfunctional in one way or another. But this was a severely dysfunctional family, and we won't take the time to go into it, but it was primarily because they violated a key principle that God has in His Word and God has for His families. God's principle for family is one man, one woman forever. That's God's plan. That's how God instituted it. In the garden, He didn't make Adam and Eve and Louise and Martha. No, He made Adam and Eve, and that was the plan. And from then on, the idea was one man and one woman. And any time in the Bible, families violated that, walked away from that principle, it ended up in a mess. It just did. You don't find a home where there's more than one wife and it did not end or have difficulties in it. Whether it be David, whether it be Jacob here, whether it be Solomon, it just never turned out right. And so because they went against God's principle, it was just part of the main contributing factors of why this was a dysfunctional family. Now, we don't have time this morning, unless we want to get out of here just in time for the pretzels tonight, to go into all the details. But the idea, if you know the story, he served 7 years for Rachel. At the end of the 7 years, Daddy pulled a switcheroo on it, a bait and switch, and gave him Leah, the older daughter. He said, because that's what tradition is, the older daughter first. And then he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. And so he starts with two wives, Leah and her sister, Rachel. He wanted Rachel. He was in love with Rachel. And we can see by the context, it speaks in there, he did have an affection. He did have love for Leah, but nothing like for Rachel. And those two bringing together, two sisters married to the same man, it was jealousy, it was bitter, it was anger. Oh, it was a mess inside the home. Now, as we look at that, you say, well, why did God permit that? Let me help you with something else before we get started. Just because God permits something doesn't mean He approves of something. See, he permitted these. He didn't bring a hammer down. He didn't get on to him for these extra marriages, these double marriages, and this 2 or 3 wives. But he was not blessing it, and he was not glad they did. By the way, in your life, just because he permits something does not mean he approves something in your life. Be very careful thinking, well, he didn't strike me dead. He didn't make me lose my job. He let this happen, so God must approve it. No, we go back to his word and his principles to learn that. But we find he fell madly in love at first sight, and now he desires to marry Rachel. But in that home, with the 2 wives, there was jealousy, resentment, and bitterness, favoritism. You would think anybody who would understand and be prepared for a life of issues in a family with favoritism would be Jacob. Because we just studied, if you look at the story of Jacob, we've got him and Esau and the favoritism of his dad and his mom with the different children. And it did not end well either. So as we look at the story, so he says, yes, I'll work for her. Laban says, well, you've been with me now for a month. He said, you're going to stay a while. He said, I'm not going to have you work for me for nothing. What would be your desire for payment? What would your wages be? What should it be? And we saw that he said, I will serve you. I will work for you for 7 years, and then you give me Rachel as a wife. And he agrees to do that. And then in verse number 20, here's the thought for this morning. This will help us. This is the focus of what we have for this morning. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. 7 years he worked. 7 years of seasons he worked, taking care of sheep, taking care of Laban's equipment, taking care of Laban's flock. And for 7 years for Rachel, notice what it says, and it seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. A few days. He was so in love with her, so anxious to have her as a bride, that for those 7 years, his man, it was just like yesterday. He said, it's just a few days ago I started, so for 7 years. By the way, in your life and my life, you know what it's like. When we're doing something we love, when we've got the right kind of focus, it goes very, very quickly. It seemed like just yesterday. In my bride's case, for her and I, it seemed like just yesterday we stood before that old Baptist preacher and just said, I do, and she was mine and I was hers, and she lived happily ever after with me. You laugh and hurt my feelings. But it does seem like just yesterday. And so it was for those 7 years. It seemed like just a few days. So we look at this great love story. And he served her not just for 7, but for 14. Because to get her, he had to work another 7 years. So for 14 years, he worked for Rachel. And for those first 7 years, it seemed like just a few days. And he was willing to do that, and it seemed like an okay thing, and he was glad to do it. He was happy to do it, and it was just such a blessing. It just seemed like it just whizzed by, but it was not an easy 7 years. It was not a very necessarily always pleasant 7 years. Somehow we get the idea, well, it seemed like it was just nothing to him, so it must have been easy. It must have been pleasant. It must have been all gravy. It must have been all smooth. But we look in Genesis 31:38, and I'll just read it for you. When he comes to talk with him later, he describes some of these years that he was serving. And it says these 20 years, if you want to look at there, it's Genesis 31:38. And he says to his father-in-law Laban, these 20 years have I been with thee. The ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee. He said, the things while I was watching your flock and watching your animals, he said, when the animals and the beasts took them, he said, I didn't bring the bill to you. I didn't bring the account to you. I brought not unto thee, but I bear the loss of it. He said, I took care of the bill. I took care of the loss. Of my hand dost thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. He said, when they were stolen, when they were killed, he said, I took care of it all. I lost it all. I wrote it off on my account and not yours. Thus I was in the day of drought consumed me. He said, had a tough time. He said, we had that big drought and we survived through that. And the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. He says, I was weary, I was tired, I was fighting the animals, and animals were killing your animals, and I bore the price, and I took the responsibility for that. He said, there was a drought that consumed me, and it was by cold by night. He says, it was a tough time. Thus have I been 20 years in thy home. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. He said, over these years, he said, you've changed how much you thought you owed me 10 times. So it wasn't an easy time. It wasn't a pleasant time always, but he was willing to do that. So we think about him. Here he is. He's got these 7 years. He's serving for Rachel, and those 7 years aren't easy. There's animals, there's loss, there's issues going on. Yet to him, it just seemed like just a few days that he had to serve. So here's the question for this morning as I was looking at that and praying about that. What was the force? What was the cause? What allowed him to go through those trials, to go through those troubles, to go through those hard times, and still he says, you know, it was really worth it all. It was no real problem at all. He said, it just seems like a few days. And the Bible tells us how he was able to do that, how he was able to go through those 7 years of tough times, challenging times, difficult times, and yet it just seemed unto him but a few days. Look at the end of verse number 20, and here's the key, and this is going to be the help for us today. It says, but for a few days, for or because the love he had to her. Why did he work for 7 years? For the love he had. Why was there such joy in the end? For the love he had. Why did he suffer silently? For the love he had. Love, his love for her was the motive, the impetus for suffering and serving. Now, I hope you don't turn off your thinking this morning, but let God speak to your heart. That idea of love, love being the motive, love being the stimulus, love being the cause, love being the force behind it, that allows him to serve. By the way, that's true in our homes. The force that allows you to serve your spouse, the force that allows you to serve your kids, the force that allows you to go through and say, still, it's a blessed time. It seems like just a few days we've been together. It seems like a few days as you watch your kids grow up. That force is for the love you have. Same thing's true in a church. How in the world in a church can we go ahead and serve when there's tough times, and sometimes people hurt you, and sometimes people aren't right, and it just seems to be difficult? Why? For the love that we have. It's true in our walk and answer and service to God. It's for the love that we have. So this morning, my challenge for me today and challenge for us today is, as a church, as Christians, as members and attenders of Lighthouse Baptist Church, is for us to learn that motive, define that key, and look at it in our lives that we might know how to serve God and serve God joyfully and serve God with pleasure and serve God so in such a way that it seems like just a few days. Because I guarantee you, when you start serving God like that, when you start serving your family like that, when you start serving God and family with that kind of love, it does go quick, it does go challenging, it does go with joy, and it does seem like just a few days. So I have to ask you, is your Christian life, the part of your Christian life, is that the longest part of your week? Oh, not for me. It wouldn't have been for him. 7 years is just a few days. So as we look at what he had to endure in those few days, those 7 years, which were just a few days, what did he have to endure that able to go very quickly? It was his humility. He had to endure humbling. It says in Hosea 12:12, talking about this story, and Jacob fled to the country of Syria, and Israel, that's Jacob's new name he got, served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. I mean, that's the lowest job you can have. That's the dirtiest job you can have. That's the most insignificant job you can have, is taking care of sheep. He said, but for a wife, he took care of sheep. So it was humbling for him. For those 7 years, he went back from his daddy, who was very wealthy, and had all those servants, and now he's the shepherd in this family for this man serving for a bride. It was very humbling. But to him, it was just a few days. He was willing to do that for the love he had. He suffered loss. We read that. He suffered financial loss. But it seemed like a few days, and he was willing to do that for the love he had. For the what, class? Love he had. For the what? Love he had. He suffered abuse from his father-in-law. He said, you changed my wages 10 times. And I doubt that was an increase. I doubt if that was bonuses. He was complaining. He says, man, you swindled me. You tricked me. You deceived me. You shortchanged me 10 different times. And yet, It seemed but a few days. Why? Because of the love he had. How is it we can serve God 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and it seems only a few days? How can we serve Christ those number of years when sometimes we have heartaches because of people, sometimes cruelty, sometimes difficulties, as Jacob did with Laban, and still only seem like a few days? The answer is for the love we have. For the love we have. How did the martyrs, as they would tie them to the pole and set fire to them and watch those flames begin to build up, and we read about in the Fox's Book of Martyr, and see as their skin begin to burn and their bodies begin to burn, yet they were still preaching and still singing praises and still glorifying God. How in the world could they do that? For the love they had. So this morning, the goal of the message is for us to comprehend, to commit to, and recommit to finding the kind of love that we may have lost, we may have never had, that we need to have for us to serve with the right motive and serve in the trials, in the difficulties, and when it's all said and done, say, well, how was your life? How was your ministry? You won't say, well, I had this issue and this issue and this issue. He said, man, it seems like just a few days. I look around the building today. I know some folks in here, you've been ministering and been with the Christ for many years. I hope it just seems like just a few days. I hope it's not focused on the difficulties. Hope it's not focused on the trials. Hope it's not focused on the things that pull us down and weakens us and get to the place where we begin to dread church and dread ministry and dread serving Christ and dread singing for Him and dread going to church. Instead, I say, man, I can hardly wait to get there. I can hardly wait to get in church. I can hardly wait to go. Why? Because of the love we have. See, the motive is love. It's not just the fact I want a pat on the back. It's not just the fact that, yes, Jesus promised rewards, but the love we have. So the goal this morning as we look at this amazing story, this love story, Jacob falling in love when he first saw it, but it said for those 7 years it seemed but a few days for the love he had. We need to reconnect with that love. The ladies sang about it. The choir sang about it. We sang about it. The love of God we have. We've got to reconnect with that love. As you sit here this morning and say, I'm really not stirred by the things of God. I'm really not excited about the things of God. I'm going through the motions because I'm supposed to. I'm going through the motions because the Bible says we should. I'm going to the motions because somebody else expects me. We ought to say, no, wait a minute. Something's missing in my life. Something's missing in my relationship. And what's missing is what we find here. For he said, man, those 7 years for the love he had for her. Have we lost it? Have we lost it? In fact, it's very dangerous, very possible for us to lose it. That's why in the church of Ephesus in Revelation 2:4 says, nevertheless, God said to them, I have somewhat against thee because thou hast left thy first love. You go back and look, they were serving, they were working. He says, but you lost the first love. You lost that first thing. And the first love for any church, the first love for any Christian is the love of Christ. Are you listening to me? It's not the love of finances. It's not the love of ministry. It's the love of Christ. That is the first love for every child of God. And when we begin to lose that, then everything is going to fall apart. When we begin to lose that, every church service is going to be 6 weeks long. Every time we have to minister is going to be a drudgery. And we'll look at our life and say, I'm not so excited and thrilled about it. But when we get that love back, when we can say about our life, boy, the ministry with God, the serving of God, it seems like just a few days over these 20, 40, 60 years because of the love that we have. So the goal in the prayer this morning is that seen in 2 Thessalonians 3:5 where it says, and I believe it's in your note, and the Lord direct your hearts into the love of God. That God would direct our hearts into the love of God. So this morning's not a deep theological thought. This morning's not something that's hard to understand, but a challenge from that little phrase where it says, it seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. So how are we going to keep serving? For the love we have. How are we going to keep laboring as the times get harder and the difficulties come? And yes, persecutions may arise. How are we going to do that? For the love we have for Him. How are we going to enjoy the journey that we're on through the difficulties and through the losses and through the challenges, the good times and the bad? The answer is in that text, for the love we have. For the love we have. 2 points this morning. 527 subpoints, but 2 main points. We find from this text, this simple text, how to keep serving. How do we get the right motive? How do we able to keep going? How do we have that mindset where all of a sudden he said, I can't believe it's only been 7 years. You can't believe that's already done. Why? Because of that love he had. So how are we going to find that? How are we going to keep that? How are we going to gain that kind of motive? How are we going to have that in our hearts and lives? Very quickly, number 1, we need to find and keep a fervent love for Christ. We need to find and to keep a fervent love for Christ. Because again, we want so many things in this world. We want so many things in our church. We want so many things in our ministry. But the key is our love for Christ. For the love we have, that's going to motivate. For the love we have, that's going to give us the joy. For the love we have, that's going to keep us on the right track. We need to find and keep and kindle, if you will, a fervent love for Christ. That's why in 2 Corinthians 15:13 it says, for whether we be beside ourselves, it is to God, or whether we be sober, it is for your cause. For the love of Christ constraineth us. See, the whole goal is for us to let God develop in our hearts and our lives a very fervent love for Jesus Christ. And he said the love of God, the love of Christ constraineth us. The word constrain means to hold together. Preacher, how in the world can we hold together in the Christian life? The love of Christ. The word there for constrain means to press, to compel, to keep in place. How can we keep going? How can we have these things going on? The love of Christ in our lives compels us, restrains us, keeps us in place, keeps us going. Whoa! It's the love. You say, preacher, I didn't come here to find out how much I need to love Christ. But that's exactly what we need. We need to have that love for the love that He had. So if we're going to have that kind of love, we need to find and keep a fervent love for Christ. Very quickly, just some thoughts. What diminishes our love for Christ? If you're sitting here this morning, you say, I used to love Him more. I used to have a love that was really hot. I used to have a love that was really fervent. I used to have a love for Christ like Jacob had for Rachel. I mean, he said, I just loved him. I couldn't get enough of him. I couldn't hardly wait to be with him. I had that kind of love, but it just seems to have dissipated. It just seems now it's just routine, and I'm going through the motion. I'm just taking care of sheep, not for any particular reason, not for any particular joy. I just seem to be going through it. So what diminishes our love for Christ? Very quickly, the Bible tells us several things. Number 1, the love of self. The love of self. In 2 Timothy 3, verse number 1, know this also in the last days. By the way, we're there. I believe we're in the last days. Are you out there this morning? I believe we're in the last days. I believe we're in the last days. Oh, I tell you what, He's coming back. And I know He is coming back. So we're in those days. He said, this know that in the last days, where we are, perilous, dangerous times shall come. Tell us, preacher, why are they dangerous times? What makes them so perilous times? He said, for or because men shall be lovers of their own selves. Oh, I tell you what, as a church, as a Christian, we're in danger. As a nation, we're in danger when we begin to love our own selves. Where the most person we love the most is ourselves. And he goes on, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. One of the things that diminishes our love for Christ is we love ourselves too much. We focus on loving us. We focus on the loving pleasure more than loving God. Oh, if you look at your life and I look at my life, we have to be on guard for that, because when it comes time to, am I going to serve God? Am I going to serve myself? If it becomes an obvious answer that I'm going to serve myself, and we don't even consider the ramifications, we don't even consider the cause of Christ, we are loving ourselves more than Christ. And when we begin to do that, we begin to lose that love that we had that stirs us up and moves us on and compels us to serve and brings that joy to our service. Love of self diminishes our love for Christ. Number two, the love of the world diminishes our love for Christ. Hey, I'm not trying to make us feel bad this morning. I'm trying to help us stir to have a love for Christ so that in our life we can say, for the love I have for Christ, I enjoy this journey. For the love I have for Christ, I'm willing to endure. For the love I have for Christ, I'm willing to keep going no matter how long it goes and what it takes because I love Him so. But what diminishes is love of self and love of the world. We know this verse, 1 John 2:15, love not the world. Neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So if I love the world, if the love of the world's philosophy, the world's way of being, the world's accolades, more than the love of Christ, they said, I don't have the love of the Father in me. In other words, if what occupies my mind is the things of the world, what occupies my heart is the things of the world. And again, we're not talking about the trees and the planets. We're talking about the philosophy and attitudes of the world. If the world is what I love for its goals and its aspiration, I'm looking for acceptance from that and love the world, then the love of the Father is not in me. So the more I love the world, the less I have the love of the Father. Again, that's just to challenge us. I have to look at my life. I can't believe we look at Jacob and he says, oh, for the love he had. The love of the world decreases our love for Christ. That's why it says in 2 Timothy, O Demas, it says, for Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. He just loved the world and he says, I think I'll quit. He had been serving. I believe he loved the Lord. But now because he began to love the world, he began to get less and less in love with Christ, and he just eventually just passed off the scene. What diminishes our love? The love of the world, the love of self, and the iniquity of the world. The iniquity of the world. There in your notes, Matthew 24:11, and many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many, and because the iniquity shall abound, because the sin around us shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Brother Roy, I think that's what we're seeing in our churches all the time right now. We're in such a wicked world, instead of that, as for Christians, instead of that driving us to Him, instead of that saying, oh, I got to love Him more, oh, I've got to be closer to Him, we just begin to get cold. We begin to get indifferent. We watch the filth on the television, you listen to the things on the news, and all the things that are in your workplaces that are trying to tell you what's right when the Bible tells you it's wrong, and all those things. And because iniquity abounds, our love for God, our love for His word, the love just begins to wax cold. So you sit here this morning, like I might be standing here this morning, and say, you know, my love is just cold. My love is not what it ought to be. Is it because I love myself too much? Is it because I'm loving the world? Or is it just I've let the iniquity and the sin of this old world chill my love for Him? By the way, the iniquity of the world will affect our love. It will, I guarantee it. That's why, guess what? You got to be in the world. You don't have to be of the world, but you got to be in there. And if you're at work 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, but you're in church 1 hour a week, guess what's going to have the biggest effect on your life? If you're not reading the Bible, if you're not praying, if you're not walking with Him, and you're going to say, why isn't my heart stirred? Why? Because the iniquity of the world is abounding and our love waxes cold. So how? How can I have that kind of love? How can I have that kind of motive? It just seems like, I just love serving God so much. After 60 years, you say, I wish I had another 60 years. After 80 years of serving, I wish I had another 80. It's been too fast. It was too quick. How can I have that kind of mindset? It's all because of the love we have. Love is the key. We see what diminishes it very quickly. How can we grow it? How can we grow it? You say, okay, preacher, I know I need it. I know I want it because I don't have it, or because I had it and I've lost it and it's cooled off. How can I build? How can I grow in this love for Christ so that in my life, when I get to the end of my life and I say, man, it's just been a few days of serving Christ. Well, it may have been 50 years, 60 years, but it just seems like a few days. Why? Because I loved it so much. Because I loved Him so much. How can I build that? How can I build that in my life? Number one, Purpose and practice it. Purpose it and practice it. You say, what are you talking about? Just decide to obey. Just decide to love. Did you know you can decide to love? You can decide to love. Because love, real Bible love, Christian love, well, the love God talks about, isn't a weird feeling that you have. Real love is not like a upset stomach you get when you got all the likes because you see somebody that's famous or somebody that you'd like to get to know. Or in the case of Jacob, whoa, he cried and he wept and he kissed her and hung all over. He just met her. He was madly in love. But we can decide to love. In fact, love is a decision. Just do it. That's why Matthew 22:36. Stay with me. Say, I want to love Christ more. All right, love Christ more. Is that hard? Love Christ more. Matthew 22:36. Man came to Jesus and said, Master, what is the great commandment of the law? Here's a commandment. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. He didn't say feel the love. He didn't say wait for the love to come upon you. He said, no, you just do it. Just do it. We can decide to love. That's why the Bible talks about older women are to teach the younger women to love their children and love their husbands. You can decide to do that. You can learn to do that. You can grow it. You say, well, I just don't feel it. Don't worry about the feeling. Actions precede feelings. You start acting, you start doing what you're supposed to be doing, and the feelings will follow. Decide, purpose, and practice it. Make the changes you need to. Just purpose it and practice it. Say, I'm going to make those decisions and I'm going to put that as my purpose and I'm just going to start practicing what it means to love Christ. That's why, another example, God commands husbands to love their wives. He said, love your wife. It's a command. Just like Jesus said, the command of God is to love Him. So I just need to obey. Okay, God, so I'm going to love you. I'm not going to wait for some feeling. I'm not going to wait until I get squishy in my stomach. I'm just going to love Him. Husbands, love your wives. It means you decide to, you practice it, and you prepare for it. You just do the things love. Whether it be flowers, whether it be kindness, whether it be sacrificing, whether it be telling them. It's what you're doing. You love them. How can we grow in our love for Christ? Purpose and practice it. Just say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Tomorrow morning in your prayer time, spend some time telling God how much you love Him. Say, God, I want to love you more. I want to care for you. I want to have that desire to be with you. I just want to love you, Lord. I do love you. And you begin to think about all the things He's done for you and all the things He's going to do for you and all how much He loves you. And just decide, I'm going to love God because it's a command. I don't have to wait for it. I just have to obey it. It's much like the prophets. You read in Psalms over and over, it commands us, listen, praise the Lord. He didn't say, when you feel like it, but he said, praise the Lord. So, well, I don't feel like praising. Praise anyway. And guess what? Again, the actions precede the feelings. You start praising God, you'll start all of a sudden feeling like praising God. You just start praising Him. Yeah, fellas, for example, praising your wife. You ought to praise your wife even if you don't feel like it. Fellas, you just missed a chance. All right. But you start praising her pretty soon, you'll believe it. And you'll like it. And you'll do it. Just start. Just start. Find and keep a fervent love for Christ. That gives you the motive for the love He had. For the love He had. Moms and dads, when your kids look at you and your walk with Christ, do they say, boy, I can tell Dad has a love for Him. I can tell Mom has a love for Him. Why do we keep going? Why do we keep enjoying? Why do we have that motive where it just seems like a few days? It's been a wonderful trip. Why? For the love He had. Number one, how do we make it grow? We purpose it and practice it. Number two, we prioritize it. As I said, this is a different kind of message for me, but it's just all Bible and it's all going to help. Prioritize it. Prioritize. Prioritize what? The love of Christ. Make it your top priority. Your top priority of love should not be yourself. The top priority of love certainly should not be the world. Your top priority of love shouldn't be your kids, shouldn't be your spouse. It is Christ. That's why Jesus said in Luke 14:26, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother, again, He's not wanting us to hate We've been through that. It means we love Him so much, it looks like we hate the others. It means it's almost insignificant compared to our love for Him. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life, also he cannot be my disciple. We just need to prioritize it. My most important love in my life must be Jesus Christ. If I'm going to have that fervent love, if I'm going to have that power to motivate me to serve Him and go the long haul and enjoy my trip, so it seems like just a few days, my love for Him's got to be priority. Again, as I've said so many times, you put Him first, everything else falls into place. Every single time. In fact, Jesus asked Simon Peter in John 21:15. So when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? Now, I don't know if He's talking about more than these other disciples or more than the fish they just ate. But either way, He says, is there anything you love more than me? Lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs. And He asked him 3 times, Do you love me? Do you love me? Each time He gave an answer. Do you love me? He said, Yes. Then feed my lambs. Do you love me? Yes. Then feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes. Then follow me. We have to prioritize our love. And so as we sit here, do you have any love for Christ? Has it waxed cold? Has it got cold? If not, no way we'll be able to say, man, it seems like just a few days. Wish I had some more. It was worth it all. So, prioritize it. Practice it. And purpose it. And 3, perfect it. Perfect it. Notice there in your notes, 1 John 4, verse 16. And we know and believe the love that God hath to us. Let me just stop right there. Do you believe the love God has towards you? I hope you do. That ought to cause a shout. The love of God hath to me. Wow, God loves me. God loves you. Oh, what an amazing thing. He doesn't just like us. He just doesn't put up with us. He loves us. And so it says, and we have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love. And he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Herein is our love made perfect. Word perfect means complete, mature. It's complete, it's mature, it's grown up into. Our love is made perfect. That we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as He is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. We love Him because He first loved us. He said we can have perfect love, mature love, satisfying love. How? By having God dwelling in us. Notice what it says. And he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Herein is our love made perfect, so that we can have that boldness in that day. Have no fear but love. We need to perfect it. Let it grow. Let it mature. Dwell more in Him. Him more dwelling in us and controlling us, that we might have that love. By the way, Jesus gave Himself and served us for the love He had for us. Are you listening? Just as Jacob served for Rachel, and it seemed just a few days, for the love he had for her. Just like that love motivated Jacob to go ahead and serve with all the trouble and all the difficulty, and it seemed like no big deal. It seemed like it was just a few days because of the love He had for her. Jesus Christ, because of the love He has for you and the love He has for me, has also endured so much for the love He has for us. You need to see it today. We need to hear it today. And you need to believe it today for salvation. The fact that He has love for us. John 15:13, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Jesus says, I'll show you what love is. It's me laying down my life for you. It's me going the cross for you. That's why in Romans 5:7, For scarcely for a righteous man will one die. He said, it's possible that somebody might die for somebody that's righteous, somebody that's really good, somebody that's really great. He says some might do that. Yea, peradventure, for a good man, some would even dare to die. You think about like the Secret Service, and for the presidents, they put their lives on the line. And for some good people, sometimes they do that for righteous people. But God, He said, we'll do that. For good people, we might sacrifice our life. But God commended or showed His love to us in that while we were yet sinners, in other words, not good, not righteous, but in fact just the opposite, sinners, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Why? Because of the love He has for us. Wow. Wow. Same idea. For the love He has for us. Ephesians 5:2, and walk in love as Christ also loved us and has given Himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God. Revelation 1:5, unto Him that loved us and washed us from our sins in His own blood. You can't get away from the sacrifice of Jesus Christ without knowing the love of Christ for us. Woo! As He hung on the cross, it wasn't because I have to, it wasn't because it's something I need to do. As He says, because I love them. Wow. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed to him but a few days, for the love he had to her. How are we going to be motivated for the love we have? How are we going to have the joy we need for the love we have? How are we going to have the peace we need for the love we have? How are we going to continue to just go on and be faithful for the love we have? Well, I'm just going to set my feet and determine. No, it's that love. How can we find that motivation? How can we have that? Kindle and keep a fervent love for Christ. Number one. Number two is short. How else can we find that motivation? Jacob, how in the world did you do that? Because I loved her so much. How in the world could it be so easy for you? Because I loved her so much. Number two, how can we keep motivated? Number two, keep the goal in mind. Keep the goal in mind. Verse 20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed unto him but a few days, for he had love, for the love he had to her. All of a sudden, 7 years is gone, and Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. You know, I don't think that after 7 years, 4 months, 3 days, and 2 hours, he went, I forgot. I forgot what I was working for. I forgot what I was doing this for. I forgot. Boy, if I'd have just remembered that, I didn't. No, he had the goal in mind all the way. When his 7 years was up, he says, Daddy-in-law, he said, I'm here. Give me my prize. Give me my bride. Give me my wages. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, how are we going to keep going? We got to have the love of Christ. We got to have that love, so it just seems like everything else is minuscule compared to that. For the love we have, but we also got to keep the goal in mind. I'm glad God's given us a goal in this old Christian life. That's why it says in Galatians 6:9, let us not be weary in well-doing. Don't get tired in doing right. For in due season, in other words, at the end of our season, at the end of our time, we shall reap if we faint not. Philippians 3:13, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and pressing forth unto the things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling in God. Keep the goal in mind. Man, Jesus is coming back. It could happen today. We could be called out of here. You might live, though, another 40, 50, 60 years, and Jesus hasn't come yet. But one day it's going to be over, and one day we're going to stand before Him. We've got to keep the goal in mind for the rewards and the crowns we can give back to Him, and a life that's pleasing to Him, and a life that glorifies Him. We've got to keep the goal in mind. Boy, when his 7 years were over, he says, I'm ready for my prize. What do you think kept him going? Yes, it was his love, but also the fact he kept the goal in mind. You folks probably never did this, but on the submarine or places you go, you find places, we started counting down. I know the ladies did that for the husbands coming back. Our patrols were 105 days. Then we said, only 104 to go left. 103 left. 102 left. Man, you're porking in. Unless you don't love your spouse. And has it been 105 days already? He's coming again. What? But keeping the goal in mind. And that love is just pushes you on. You've got to keep the goal in mind. Jesus is our goal, or Jesus had the same goal. Jesus said in John 12:27, now is my soul troubled. He said, boy, this is tough. He said, I'm having a struggle about this going to the cross. He said, I know it's going to be bad. I know it's going to be hard. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. He said, should I ask God to help me out? Should I just quit? He says, but for this cause came I unto this hour. Jesus, how in the world are you going to endure the cross? Got the goal in mind. Got the goal focused. Hebrews 12:2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, the goal set before him, the fact that we were going to be saved, the fact he was, yes, going to the cross, yes, he was going to suffer all hell for you, all hell for me, and take our sin upon him, but yes, he knew at the end, those of us who be saved will spend eternity with him. For the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Keeping the goal in mind. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. And they seemed to him but a few days. Because life was easy. No. Because he had all the possessions in the world he wanted. No. For the love he had. What's going to keep us going? The love we have. The love we have. So I have to ask you this morning, first question is, are you saved? In other words, if you died right now, are you 100% sure you'd go to heaven or not? Or maybe you just don't know. I'm glad God loved me so much, he paid the price. He loved me so much, he was willing to go to the cross. He loved you so much, he was willing to go to the cross. Do you know for sure you're saved? If not, you need to be saved today. See, the Bible says we're all sinners. All of us. And because of our sin, we deserve a place called hell. But God loved us so much, he died for us, paid the sin debt. And we don't have to go there. Why? Because he loved us. And if we come to him, calling upon him, trusting him, believing what he did on the cross of Calvary for us, he says he'll save us. Whosoever shall call upon him, Lord, shall be saved, and saved from hell. You need to be saved today. Saved today. Say, preacher, I am saved. All right, I have to ask myself, just like I want you to ask yourself, how's your love today? How's your love? Really pretty obvious. You can tell by how you live, how you act, what you do, what you say, how you feel. Seemed to him but a few days for the love he had. Lighthouse Baptist Church, Christian, let's learn to love him again. Love him again. Love him again. So how in the world at the end you say, boy, that was a tough job, but you know it was all right? That job wasn't so bad. Why do you say that? Because of the love I have for him. Boy, you've been doing it a long time. You haven't seemed like just a few days. Why? Because I love him so. I love him so. Let's check our love this morning. Let's bow our heads.